28 years later is finally here, the long-awaited follow-up to one of the most iconic horror films of the 2000s. But after all this time, can it actually live up to the legacy? Well, let's find out. What's up, my dude? Your friendly neighborhood Tony here, and as I do with all my movie reviews, I'm gonna give you a little bit of information about 28 years later. I'll let you know the things I liked and didn't like about the movies, and finally, I'll let you know whether or not it's worth you spending your time and money to see it in theaters. If that kind of thing sounds cool to you and you wanna see more reviews just like this, make sure you subscribe. Okay, so for those that don't know, 28 Years Later is the third film in the Rage Virus series, following 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later. And this time we've got the original team back together. Danny Boyle returns to direct with a script from Alex Garland, which already gives this one way more credibility than most modern horror sequels. The story takes place almost 3 decades after the original outbreak, with most of the world having just moved on. There we follow a small coastal community in the UK that's been living in isolation, safe from the virus, until, of course, something changes. Aaron Taylor Johnson stars alongside Jodie Comer, as well as newcomer Alfie Williams, with Ralph Fiennes also jumping in the mix. This is also being billed as the start of a brand new trilogy, so it's not just a legacy sequel, it's a whole new chapter. So look, I'll be honest, I have been cautiously optimistic about this one ever since they announced it. 28 Days Later is one of those movies that totally changed the game for me, and it kind of got me into the zombie genre, if I'm being honest. The visual style of it, the music, the pacing, it all just hits different. Now, 28 Weeks Later was solid as well-ish, but without Danny Boyle and Alex Garland involved, it didn't quite have the same edge. So hearing that the original team was back for this one, that was a big deal. It immediately made this feel like more than just another sequel. It was more like a true continuation of something important. That being said, it's been over 20 years since the original, and horror has evolved a lot since then. Now, I wasn't expecting them to just reinvent the genre again, but I was hoping they'd bring the same kind of grounded intensity and tension that made the first one iconic. Plus, the cast that they pulled together seemed pretty solid. So yeah, I went into this one with some real hope. Not hype exactly, but hope. So okay, let's get into the meat of the review, what worked and what didn't work. And of course, we'll start with what worked. First off, I've said it kind of a couple times already, but it's just good to see Danny Boyle and Alex Garland back together again in this franchise. There's a certain confidence in the direction that you feel almost immediately. The camera work is sharp, the tension builds in a way that feels earned, and the pacing, for the most part, keeps things moving with just enough space to breathe. And look, 28 Days Later was a lightning in the bottle kind of movie. You're not gonna recapture that exact same feeling 20 years later. But I think what this one does really well is it updates the tone and the energy without losing the soul of the original. It still feels grounded, it still feels bleak, and it still has that same sort of grimy, decaying energy. The performances are strong across the board. Aaron Taylor Johnson really surprised me here. He brings this quiet intensity that works perfectly for this world. You buy into his desperation, and he never feels like he's trying too hard. Ralph Fiennes as well, his character isn't over-explained, but he brings a real sense of presence and a quiet menace when it's needed. And also the new kid, Alfie Williams, he really held his own. His character could have easily felt like that typical young survivor trope that we've seen in other post-apocalyptic stories, but there's something very human and raw about how he plays it. Definitely somebody to keep an eye on. Jodie Comer also does a solid job here. She definitely holds her own in the scenes that she's in, and she brings an emotional weight where it's needed. Now, as far as what didn't work with this movie, honestly, there's not much here that didn't work for me. The pacing felt tight. The movie's solidly under 2 hours, which is kind of the perfect sweet spot for this kind of story. And for the most part, it kept me locked in and emotionally invested in the characters and genuinely anxious about what might happen to them. That being said, I did take issue with the way that the story wrapped up. No spoilers, of course, but it definitely ends in a way that feels more like an extended setup for the sequel rather than a proper conclusion. And look, I get it. We all know that another movie is coming, and I'm definitely excited for it, but this one could have landed stronger if really they had just cut it like a minute or two earlier. There was a moment that would have made for a really solid, satisfying endpoint, but instead they push a little further, opening up a new thread that doesn't really get to be explored. It's definitely not a deal breaker, but I'm not a fan of movies that end like, welp, I guess you're just gonna have to come back in 2 years and finish the story. Just let this chapter breathe, and then you can build from there. So yeah, it's a small gripe, but it's the one thing that kept this from feeling fully complete on its own. Now, while 28 Years Later is still in theaters, it's definitely worth shouting out the originals, 28 Days Later and of course 28 Weeks Later, which are both available on Blu-ray. I actually own both of them myself, and they still absolutely hold up really well, especially 28 Days Later with that grainy, almost documentary style look. It adds so much tension and atmosphere. Now, if you've never seen them or if it's been a while, now is a great time to go back and revisit them. I'll drop some links in the description if you want to check them out. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it helps support the channel, which of course I always appreciate. So yeah, 28 Years Later is a more than worthy follow-up to one of the most iconic horror films of the 2000s. Between Danny Boyle's direction, Alex Garland's writing, and a solid cast, this one manages to feel fresh while still honoring what came before. If you're a fan of the original 2 movies, especially 28 Days Later, you're absolutely gonna find a lot to appreciate here. The tension is real, the characters feel grounded, and it doesn't rely on cheap thrills. It's smart, brutal, and emotional in all the right ways. And I'd say if you're into zombie horror movies or post-apocalyptic thrillers in general, this one should absolutely be on your radar. It's not just another mindless gore fest, it's got depth and it really earns your attention. Now, as far as whether you should see it in theaters or wait for it to come out on streaming, I'd say that if you can catch it on the big screen, definitely do it. The sound design and the cinematography and some of the ways that the sequences hit with the audience, it adds a lot. But if that's not an option, definitely keep it on your list for when it hits streaming, because either way, it is absolutely worth your time. All right, now I want to hear from you. Are you planning on seeing 28 Years Later? Or if you've seen it already, did it live up to the hype? And what do you think about the ending? Go ahead and drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Of course, if you enjoyed this review, do me a solid and hit the subscribe button. I've got a ton more reviews that are coming your way this summer season. If you got a friend who's into 28 Days Later, go ahead and share this with them. Otherwise, I'll catch you next time. All right, be good.